Hey, can you guys snap one time if you can hear me? Snap two times if you can hear me. Snap three times if you can hear me. Okay, cool. I just want to see if you guys know how to snap. That's all that was. Feel free to like snap during, after, even hours after, days after the poem is done. It's kind of like kudos to the poet. And I'll be able to hear him in some kind of way. When I go days without stopping my parents' home, my mom will text me saying, "Come get some food at the house. I made some soup. Come get some." I made some really good chicken salad the other day, knowing that I will never say no to her cooking because I understand that cooking is her love language. One that's been passed down from generations of grandmothers, aunties, and ancestors of Mississippi, country kinfolk culinary artists who crafted dishes from table scraps, carrying bones of a segregated South, tossed at their feet in contempt, yet they always found ways to add love to every plate. And that's why cornbread always tasted like a warm heaven. Collard greens and mac and cheese brought scent that brought comfort. Chicken, seasoned, fried in cast iron skillets, always brought families together, same way church gathers congregants. And yeah, if we honest, it ain't the most healthiest. And we know that food disparities in Black homes always cause stroke and high blood pressure, but I cannot deny the holiness that a mother's cooking can bring. How it always brings Black boys home. Always makes sure that we're fed, even on the days that I starve myself. With morning eyes that feel as if they never rested. Stomach empty with aches and pains that sit at the dinner table of my mind, gossiping of the shame written on walls of my spirit, so my soul stays feeding on lies like leftovers. That I keep preserved in cold chamber of chest, frigid-hearted and hungry for a helping hand, though, keeping my mouth shut as I swallow suffering in silence. And I know that closed mouths don't get fed, but some days opening up is exhausting. It feels like carrying heavy loads of dishes, stained with fears of my future, anger of past that pile up, and sink of my psyche that overflows, though I tell myself it ain't overflowing, because to be Black man in this country is to carry heavy grime on your plate and act like it don't exist. Tell yourself that it don't exist. Let your neighbor tell you that it don't exist. And my mom, I feel like she knows this. And that's why she always reminds me, no matter how far I go out, to come back home, where I can hear the prayers of Grandma Pugh as plates are handed out. When this world deems me an invisible man, the yams remind me who I am when the world tells me what I am not, as I walk to dinner table like altar, as I lay my head down of all my burdens and know that whatever happens to me out there, out here, while I'm there, I am there, healed, transformed, and whole. So next time my mom texts me saying, "Come get some food at the house. I made some soup, you should come get some. I made some really good chicken salad the other day." Just know I will never say no to her cooking, because understand that cooking is her love language. And I've been starving more than I'm ready to admit. Poem. Appreciate you. Thank y'all. So thank y'all for being present and kind of sticking around for this. I want to thank Faith and the team for having me come again. Like I've been coming to events at Augustana for like a decade now for workshops, performances, presentations, and they've always like been reciprocal with kind of the love and support of what I do as a creative and an educator. So very thankful for Augustana and yourselves as well, like I said. So I go by Mr. Aubs. I'm a poet. That's what I do as a career. I write poetry, teach poetry through a nonprofit that I run called Young Lions Roar, where I work with students like throughout the Midwest and throughout kind of the US and kind of showing them how to write poetry. Really, I shouldn't even say showing, but inviting them to kind of find creative expression through poetry and other forms of literary art. I've been doing that for about 4 years now. So like I pretty much live in this world of poetry gratefully and kind of made it something that like I do as a profession and all that. And so when Faith reached out for me to kind of be here, it was like an easy yes. And she kind of gave me the bonus opportunity to kind of write something presentation wise. And like being somebody, I'm in grad school right now through a school called Maharishi International University, which is a school pretty much based on the practice of transcendental meditation, just that Eastern practice and all that. So just with all the stuff that I'm kind of learning, I was like, oh, dang, it's the perfect time to kind of like blend these worlds that I'm kind of really enthralled in, really kind of enveloped in when it comes to understanding writing, understanding it from like a personal narrative, an ancestral narrative, but also with kind of like the time being that we're in, also like a political narrative too. And just really, as I've been learning how to kind of blend those, it kind of was like a perfect opportunity for me to kind of like form a presentation, kind of talking about these worlds, talking about art from an ancestral perspective, from an inner work perspective, and a political perspective, and kind of show how I kind of see them working together. And hopefully y'all take something away from that. And after being like a writing teacher, I have a writing prompt after. Yes, it's homework. I am sorry. You're not going to be graded though. And there ain't no right or wrong answers. So you can do what you will with that. So when I talk about art as like an ancestral practice, I feel like everybody kind of has their own definition of what that means. So like, this is not a concrete, this is what it means, because I'm not an expert on this. I'm just an observer and kind of like what it means to me. So like, if it resonates, awesome. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. And I hope you kind of find a way it resonates with you. But as I kind of think about it as an ancestral practice, it's a practice that brings you to a greater understanding of self from the lives of the ones who come before you. And I know kind of like when we talk about ancestral or anything ancestry wise, sometimes we think that it's like only and exclusively like a said black and brown BIPOC thing. And for me, obviously, I can only speak from my narrative, like understanding ancestry and from my perspective, but I don't want it to be kind of like an inclusive, like an exclusive thing where it's like, if you don't share the narratives of those of us in the black community or in brown community or whatever community we inherit, that you don't have ancestry. I think everybody has ancestry. It's how you kind of dig and look for that. Ancestry can mean people who are in close proximity to you, related to you by blood. Maybe they're far proximity. Maybe they're people who like inspired you, that you resonate with, whether in message, in art, in just a personhood. You can find ancestry in those things and those kind of people. So for me, it's all about how you kind of go about finding that ancestry for yourself. And for me, being an artist, being someone who like grew up a fan of hip hop, rap, and kind of finding kind of like inspiration through these art forms, art's a way that I kind of found kind of like my ancestral connections to creativity. But also being someone who goes to school that I do too, like meditation is also a big part. And I think like I'd even dangerously assume that a lot of creatives benefit from the art of meditation. And like, it's not, when I say meditation, I don't think it's not like what we kind of think as like a yogi on a mountain and you're just like cutting your hair and you're wearing just like these garments and stuff. Like, I think it's just literally just sitting down in quietness. It's walking in quietness. That right there, meditation can look practical in that, but it could also be prayer, whatever it looks like for you too, and reading. These things to me are what kind of like are the conduits and kind of connecting us to that ancestry that kind of helps us inspire to find what we are called to create and what we're called to like cultivate in ourselves. But with kind of like this and kind of what we're talking about in the practice of poetry, I want to kind of like focus on what that looks like in the practice of poetry. But if you're someone who like is a musician, or you don't write poems, or you have a creative outlet in painting and all that, hopefully you can kind of take this and kind of transfer it to that knowledge of what you're used to. So for me, what it kind of looks like and kind of like integrating like our ancestral narratives and stories and poetry, it's thinking of storytelling over poetry. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Gil Scott-Heron. He was a poet from Chicago. He was the one who wrote the most famously known The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. You probably heard it in some kind of like way, shape, or form, but he's the one who wrote that. And he did this really cool talk not too long ago where he talks about poetry and talks about how sometimes we get so enthralled in the art of like sounding poetic. We get super deep and like super intricate in our words. We're like, nobody knows what the heck we're talking about. Even me as a poet, sometimes I'll go to some spaces and after I'm like performing, I'll have someone show me their poems and I'll be like, that's cool. I just don't understand what you're saying. It's like, so I just don't understand. And it's not to discredit, that their creativity ain't truth, but I think sometimes, and it looks different for different people, that we can kind of get into so much of this art of poetry that we forget that it's just storytelling. It's me sharing a story with you that you can understand. It's you sharing a story with me that I understand, even though I don't live in that narrative. And for me, when you're able to share stories in that kind of space, it does something different for the world, even for those who don't really resonate with our stories. They understand the words in which kind of come out our mouth. So that's an important part of kind of like creating poetry from like that storytelling ancestral perspective. Letting your poetry leap is another thing I've kind of found. So when you think about leaping, it's pretty much, how many of y'all, I guess as a raise of hands, how many of y'all have like attempted to write a poem or wrote something close to you? Okay. And you don't have to raise your hand for the next part, but like maybe just nod or be like, okay, I know what that means. If you don't know what it means, just don't go like this, because then that'll make me feel weird and awkward. No, but so have you ever had those moments when you're kind of just writing and you're kind of letting yourself just kind of get into the flow of writing, and you have this topic in your mind that you're writing about, and then you find yourself lines later writing about something completely different that you're like, I didn't anticipate this. That's what leaping is. That's actually something that like Robert Bly, who's a creative, who's a poet himself, actually encourages. Like when you write like that, that's you letting your subconscious and like your bigger conscious like allow you to kind of control this narrative, and it's no longer you controlling the pen, but it's someone else or something else more so outside of you, whatever you want to call that something else. Some people call it God, some people call it creator, some people call it great being, whatever you call it. I don't think the name matters. I don't even think the being think the name like cares about what the name is, but it's just really acknowledging that whatever's coming out of you is not from you, and that should kind of like allow that kind of assurance that like you're writing something that like the world needs in that moment. And the last thing is really kind of a practical thing too. It's just right. This is something that like I'm always like expressing to my students, people I work with, when it comes to writing. Sometimes we suck ourselves out because we try to sound super poetic. We want to be super deep, or we want things to make sense. And sometimes writing doesn't make sense. And I think that's the beautiful part about art. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. I had a student the other day who I was having write a prompt on this concept called fabulism, which is pretty much taking fantasy and putting it in real life. And she told me that she didn't want to do it because she didn't know what to write. And I'm like, that's all the reason to write. So when you kind of write from the ancestral space, I think our only job is to just write. Even if we don't know what it is, even if it ain't perfect, we're just called to create that thing. And I think that's kind of the first step in that. So when we get to that writing part, thinking about leaping and thinking about storytelling over poetry, we kind of move into like what that inner work part looks like. When I kind of think about praise, when it comes to poetry, like it's again, like coming from like a religiously kind of inclined world that we come from, we kind of think about praise in the sense of like what it looks like in church pews or Catholic pews or mosques and all that, which it could be those things, whatever you kind of find your path in, those things are things too. But I think it can also look wider, and it can also be found just through questions. So when I think about creativity, and as we kind of find like our ancestry and what that looks like and what we're called to create, a couple questions I think come to mind that kind of help with that creative process is what words do I remember? That poem that I just did, there's words from my mother that I remembered her saying, which is just simple inquiries or simple asks of like, hey, do you want to come to the house and eat? Which then kind of makes me remember the things that my grandma said. That makes me think of the things that like my grandma's grandma said. And these things, like as I kind of think about these things, those kind of create landscapes in which I can kind of create and give something to myself and the world in which I create for. So that first question of what words do I remember kind of helps us find that connection between ourselves and the ancestry that we want to kind of find and to create stories out of. The next question is, what unspoken lessons did I learn? Again, in that poem that I just shared with y'all about my mom's cooking, it taught me the unspoken truth of like what cooking is, like just from the sense of like my relationship with my parents is great. I'm grateful for it in every way, shape, and form. But we also had this kind of interesting thing where we never really like spoke affection to each other. We've never said like I love you to each other. We've probably embraced a couple times, but the biggest way, and I always took that as like, oh, my parents don't know how to like express love, but that isn't a thing. They expressed it through the way that they cooked. And as I kind of thought about that and thought about the unspoken truth there, and maybe kind of thinking about in a wider range of like, oh man, how much of us kind of have that experience of like how we're actually given love and expressed through like these culinary arts or in ways that like we're not used to, and how can I like open that up for us to kind of see. And like through that poem, I kind of created this peace, that kind of unspoken truth through kind of food. So that question of what unspoken lessons did I learn is kind of like the landscape in which we kind of create. Like think about like the things that aren't said that you learn from your parents, the things that aren't said you learn from your friends, your family members, your neighbors and all that, and allowing those kind of be the landscapes. And like that takes, just kind of being present with those things and really kind of being aware of those things. The last question is, how was I influenced by the way they moved? And when I say they, I'm thinking about, again, the ancestry of those who kind of like we consider our ancestors, again, and maybe people who you're a fan of or resonate with as creatives, like Gil Scott-Heron. Like he's someone who inspired me in the way that he moved, the way that he spoke truth, the way that he was both gentle, but the way that he was both authoritarian, like very authoritative as well, and how he kind of walked in that way. That inspires me in how I kind of walk in this world as a creative, and how I kind of like hope to inspire others to kind of walk in that narrative too. So when we kind of think about that and think about that and more so for those who kind of think about praise, and you may not be religiously inclined or spiritually inclined, you're like, okay, what's the purpose of it altogether if you're not resonating with it in that level? So when I kind of think about kind of like praise and kind of giving honor to those before us, however that looks, however we thank them, however we give our odes to them, it helps us in the sense of like what we write, we embody. If we write about the things that we're grateful for and the people before us, the narratives that we learn from them and the unspoken truths, the ways that we give gratitude to them for the way that they move, when we kind of like live in that space of like writing about those things, they become kind of the food to our said spirit, our being and all that. And we're able to walk out of those things kind of like when we kind of understand those things on a wider perspective. Other thing is that you can't fully give to others what you don't give to yourself. And I think and kind of going into the next slide that we have, I think that's the most important part too, just in the sense of like, especially with where we're at, like in a political, social space, I assume, more than less of us kind of like want to give good to the earth, want to do good unto like all the chaos that's happening, all the people who don't feel seen and all that. And I think that's always a great pursuit. But I think so much often we miss the fact of like, we got to build those things up in ourselves first before we can give it, or else we're kind of just giving from a dry well. And when we give from a dry well, it's kind of scarce. We're just giving people scarcity and not the fullness of what we can give to them. So that kind of leads to the part of inner work and how art kind of goes into that part. When I kind of think about this part, I think about the words of Lauryn Hill when she says, how you gonna win when you ain't right within, which for me is super important in kind of the space that we're at, in kind of navigating this world that's like constantly feels like it's getting heavier, more chaotic. People don't know what to do. And people are kind of like losing themselves. And for me, I've learned kind of like in my role of being a creative and an artist and an educator and kind of using that as my said activism, I got to find a groundedness in myself to kind of help those things. And for me, groundedness kind of looks like finding an inner workflow that kind of moves from rage to anger. Because anger isn't a bad thing. Like anger is something that should fuel kind of like what we do, how we create, and how we kind of walk into spaces and kind of like defend the least of these, and also kind of express our boundaries as humans. And I think sometimes we kind of like live in that space of rage where we let that anger get so festered and kind of so heavy where we just don't know what to do but to kind of like express rage and fight with the same things that our enemies kind of fight with, in the sense of like being okay with hateful rhetoric, shooting back to the people who have the hateful rhetoric towards us, kind of like speaking disdain, like the people who speak disdain to us. And, again, it's kind of like a fire versus fire thing. And like when you fight fire versus fire, everything burns around you. So the rage to anger is very important in that. Just learning how to channel that and kind of sit with that in a way that's productive and doesn't bring you down or the people around you. And moving from perilousness to peace and also victim to victor. When I think about these two, I kind of think about the poem, like a small quote from a poet named Marwan Makhoul, who's a Palestinian poet who said, in order for me to write poetry that isn't political, I must listen to the birds. And in order to hear the birds, the warplanes must be silent. And that's a big truth there. And it's funny because I often think about this and think about the clash between his words and Lauryn Hill's words and kind of like how they kind of bring this contrast of like, they both have their truth. And I think in kind of the context when we talk about the inner work, it's learning to kind of find those birds, those metaphorical like birds, find the nature within you, find the peace within you. And though you can't see it on the outward, don't force yourself to try to see something that's out there, but ask yourself, how can I find this inwardly and find something that I can produce that's good unto others, whether that be through my art as a poet, as a writer, as a painter, and all that. And that's kind of like the mainfulness of the purpose of the praise. So this kind of leads to like, when we kind of think about the praise, the ode we give to the people before us, and how we kind of like use that ode to inspire us as creatives, as writers, as educators, as whatever you will, what you consider creative. And when we start doing that inner work of like learning how to calm down our inner world before we try to expect ourselves to try to calm down a bigger outer world, I think once we kind of like have those practices in motion, because I don't think it's about having it perfect. I don't think you're ever going to have those practices perfect, because we're all human at the end of the day. So these practices are always going to like find their ways in an ebb and flow of success, mistake, but it's just kind of keeping constant to it. But once we have those, I think that's when we're kind of ready at finding the work of like how we kind of create art that's that kind of like challenges the world politically. And when I kind of think about it, again, being someone who kind of comes from the ancestry of like having parents who were Christian pastors and prophets and prophetess and that. Now me, I recognize those spiritual practices as what they are, like a part of my ancestry, even though that has looked different. It's still, again, like me honoring that and understanding, hey, that's part of my narrative. I look at like the poet and kind of this kind of time and space as the prophet. And if you aren't really kind of like privy to like the theological terms in that, a prophet was pretty much somebody who spoke really uncomfortable truths and power for the sake of like the least of these, whether it be political, social, or even spiritual, obviously, and kind of use their arts, use their voice to kind of speak to these things. When you think about creatives today, whether it be, we don't have Gil Scott-Heron today. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Stephen Willis, who's a poet. If you're not, definitely look up his work. Really amazing poet. Black Chakra, a really amazing poet too. But these poets are ones that live in this day and time, but they act as prophets with their work because of how they speak truth uncomfortably to power. And sometimes that looks like both speaking to power, but also giving power to the people as well, and understanding that like we don't have to play victim in our personhood because of the people who are above us, who make these legislations, who kind of like make it harder for those of us who aren't the upper class, who are the middle and lower class, and understanding that like our work as poetic prophets, if you will, is to kind of remind us that we have that power. It doesn't look like having money. It doesn't look like having a stability when it comes to economics, but it looks like understanding like because of the stories within us, because of the work we have within ourselves, that power comes from a place that doesn't entail like the surface or entail what's outwardly, but it comes from what's inwardly. And with that too, it's when you kind of like walk in that space of a poetic prophetness, as I'll call it, you understand that like your words are no longer for you. And I think that's important too, because poetry, it's kind of a balance, right? Especially when you kind of share poetry. Poetry should always be first and foremost for you and for kind of like your personhood, for you to be good, to make sure you're straight, to make sure you're grounded. But when you start sharing it outwardly, in that moment of sharing it and kind of giving to your neighbor in that moment, it's no longer yours. The narrative that I shared about my home, the way that I connect with my parents, it's a narrative of mine, but the way it connects with you is now yours. However you find power in that, however you find encouragement in that is now yours. And I think that's both joy, but also a hard part as a creative, like for us to kind of balance, because like when we create work, we like it to just be ours. We like it to just be under our ownership. But when we think about our work in a wider space and understand that like our work, if we wanted to heal the world, we got to understand that like it's not just ours, that our poems can be shared long after we're gone, in books, in stories, in this beautiful world of the social medias, which sometimes is annoying too, and kind of takes up so much of our attention, but our work can be shared in all these different demographics. And last, it's really asking the question too of how does that power fuel? Again, because sometimes with our creativity, we talk about the hard things. We talk about things that we need to get off our chest, and the art should always be there. But when we kind of think about art from the sense of like how we're channeling that ancestry, how we're channeling that inner self, and how we're channeling that inner work, we're thinking about too, how does this work empower my neighbor? How does this work allow my neighbor to understand that they're bigger than the issues that they're bogged down by? How does this work fuel them to like go another day and understand that like the chaoticness that we're facing it together, and allowing that's got to be the conduit to our work. So now that I've done all that talking, I want y'all to, I'm going to invite y'all to also do a writing prompt. You don't have to do it now. Do it when you have time, when you have space, when you've kind of thought about everything and all that. But it's called Finding Inner Power in Poem. So a part of this prompt, what I want you to kind of do when you have that space and time is simply sit with yourself, which is kind of different from the prompts I give because it's always like, okay, I want you to write this, any other. But with the what we kind of talk about, I think this is kind of a way to kind of pursue it. But sit with yourself and ask these questions. What words from the past come up when you sit with yourself? What do you feel inwardly? How can these works be prophesied in a way that is healing and empowering? So if you want to write these questions down or take a picture, we all got phones. It's probably the easiest ways too. And then write it down later. Definitely take these down and kind of see where it kind of takes you creatively. Because again, like as a creative, I can tell you what you should write. But I think sometimes the questions are the better kind of pathways to what we create because it's not giving us what we should, but kind of like where we can go with these questions is going to look different to different people. So that's your prompt for today. Again, it's a little homework. You ain't been graded on it, but whatever you create, definitely create with full understanding that like it's going to be powerful because it's something that you create. It's original because you created it. And when you kind of like tap into like sitting with yourself and allowing those ideas to kind of come to you slowly, quietly and patiently, and all the more has the power behind it. So thank y'all for sitting through that and all that. And I'm going to have spit one more poem for y'all if I can do that. Give me a snap if y'all still with me too. Are we cool with that? Cool. 2 more snaps? 3 more? Okay, cool. Thank y'all again. I can't recall a message my grandma preached, nor a prayer she prayed. What I do remember, though, is how she sang. My grandmother carried notes as if she held the whole world in her song. She was a songstress, plagued by poverty, who Ephesians 6 herself for a war waged against her since Genesis. Neighbors so close to Brown versus Board that she could smell hate burning in classrooms every morning as she walked through hallways carrying fiery glares of a segregated school. Yet never lost her voice to toxic fumes because she was God, embodied in beauty of blackness, who could baptize amazing grace to be cleansed from sins of its master, lifted from waters as a beautiful redemption song worthy of being poured over our heads after sermon. She was a minister of music who sang in tongues, mahogany spirituals, echoing Negro rituals, carried through a lineage of congregants crucified like Christ as crooks, coons, colored sketched black on auction blocks where she was sold by sellers and stripped from their families, yet could conjure a chorus from their core with a harmony so elegant that you couldn't tell held pain under praise. Same way our smiles bloom, with powers to turn barren gardens to growing grounds, even with our minds buried under depression. Same way choir members woke up Sunday morning to see Dylan Roof shoot sex in sanctuary, yet still put on their Sunday's best for Bible study and faith that God would grant them a hymn that healed the hurt. You see, we are artists who've learned how to paint our scars in glory. Masters of modern technology who conquered English devices created to keep us compliant, yet used as tools of resistance against a system that can't keep us silent. Schools that ban books of poets but can't avert ears from the metaphors found in flowers whose petals point towards trees carrying truth. Feds fixed on finding ways to cancel Billie Holiday but can't turn attention from strange fruits. FBI arresting rappers, rhyming from roots, turning black thoughts to soul food, simmer to what sour becomes sweet offering, as if the world ain't ever took our tongues that ain't ever taste the bitter hates thrown at us. You may not go to church. You may not believe in a God, same way you may not fully understand our witty wordplay, rhythm, and world in which we inhabit. But you will feel the spirit in our art, in our dance, in our poems, in our songs, the same way I did when my grandmother sang. Poem. Thank y'all again. Thank y'all. I'm excited to hear the poets who are coming up and sharing their narratives. Thank y'all for sitting through my narrative and me talking about this blend of ancestry, inner work, and political isms. Thank y'all again. Thank you, Faith, again. Appreciate it.